Embattled Former Ethekwini Mayor Zandile Gumede has been elected as the ANC's regional chairperson. Gumede defeated Speaker Thabani Nyawose, who had committed to bringing stability to the metro should he be elected to that top post. Gumede did not attend the region's elective conference due to the party's step-aside resolution, which prevented her from engaging in any activities of the ANC. But she has accepted, or rather she did accept her nomination in absentia. Our senior politics reporter Ziyanda Ngcobo was following the conference, and she joins us now live for some analysis of what unfolded, Ziyanda, because the question is, I suppose, given what President Cyril Ramaphosa had to say following the Mpumalanga conference, where he said, we need to introspect about why we even nominate leaders who are implicated in this way. And then 1 week later, the very same thing happens.
Well, I think ultimately it boils down to the issue of the quality of the membership of the African National Congress. If what some analysts say is anything to go by, that's where they place what we've seen in Mpumalanga as well as what happened in eThekwini. Another view, however, Michelle, is that, the voice of the branches has been heard here, especially since the step-aside guidelines do not prohibit the branches from nominating, who they want into positions of power within the party. The guidelines for step-aside mainly affect, governance and deployments within the state apparatus, but not necessarily within the party structures. So there are different and mixed, views about the re-election of Zandile Gumede as eThekwini chairperson. But I think the resounding and agreement that many have come to is that this is definitely going to embolden the radical economic transformation faction in eThekwini and in other parts of the country after Gumede's victory. And certainly her victory also represents, some kind of a success and a build-up then towards the presidential campaign of Dr. Ziyanda Ngcobo. Just the other day, another region in KwaZulu-Natal and the lower South Coast also appointed somebody who seemed to be aligned with Dr. Ziyanda Ngcobo. And so, whilst eThekwini is the largest region of the ANC, as we now start putting the pieces together of the different regional conferences in KwaZulu-Natal in particular where we are, you start to see a picture where you can see just how hotly contested that provincial conference in July is going to be.
Yeah, there's the provincial conference in July, as you say, Ziyanda, but of course we're looking at all of this through the lens of the all-important December elective conference. You've already talked about the RET faction being emboldened by the election of Zandile Gumede. Who might be, aside from Ziyanda Ngcobo, who we know is on a presidential slate, so say analysts, come December, who else might be part of that faction as we build up to December?
So in terms of presidential candidates, you've had several names cropping up. Earlier on you would have heard about Lindiwe Sisulu also putting up her hand. That's not necessarily the most important thing right now in terms of the actual names for the presidential candidates. Insofar as when we're looking at these regions, it's more about who is aligning with who right now. And at least because these conferences are taking place, we're able to start seeing how these factions are morphing, remembering, Michelle, that factions are not stagnant. The road to December is going to be long. The factions that existed, in December just last year and even in 2017 are not exactly in the shape, way, or form that they were, going into Nasrec. So it's more about what are the regions doing right now, who are they putting in place, and then we get to hear about the people behind the scenes. So maybe I can't tell you about the presidential candidates per se, but I can tell you that, there were videos circulating of Ziyanda Ngcobo addressing Zandile Gumede supporters, and that there was talk about Bathabile Dlamini and suspended Secretary General Ace Magashule being in town. Just yesterday, after the results, in the basement parking, I saw, the RET champions Nkosentra Shezi and Carl Niehaus, who are fervent supporters of former President Jacob Zuma. So whilst you can say, yes, these are Jacob Zuma supporters, they're also supporters of others within a certain slate faith. And so it's more about watching how these, factions are aligning and realigning all at the same time. And I think what's happened here in eThekwini also speaks to how this discussion about renewal and unity, many are saying it's just a facade. And in fact, what happened here has undermined whatever efforts President Cyril Ramaphosa has been trying to implement, because, the loss of Thabani Nyawose has been seen as a major defeat by the faction of the president going into that elective conference, where he wants to, of course, still stands rather to be re-elected as president. And this is why I'm saying it's seen as, a reawakening of some sort of those who are likely to go against the president. Some at times have referred to them as the coalition of the wounded. And they're now saying, with Bathabile Dlamini's fate being to be determined, sometime this week after being convicted of perjury, she will now be added onto that list. In fact, last night I spoke to Pulemabe, who said that they'd be reflecting, the NWC, the National Working Committee, which is meeting today, will be reflecting on the gap in those step-aside guidelines. Let's listen to what he had to say.
When we introduced the step-aside notion, it was not meant to either undermine, work against, promote renewal. We had said that this is being introduced to allow cadres whose matters are before the courts to focus on those, but also give such cadres an opportunity within a review window period to come to the organization and then make reflection on how such cases are going through. The expectation is that those very cadres, because they remain innocent, it doesn't mean that when you are criminally charged, suddenly the ANC, through step aside, finds you guilty. That was not the intention. The organization said that in our process of restoring the credibility and integrity of the African National Congress, we have to do certain things differently. These are still members of the African National Congress in good standing. Branches are making their own expression in the manner that they are doing, because the very branches do not know when such cases that are before the courts would be concluded. Now, we have never said we are doing this to disenfranchise individual members from participating in the full political life of the organization.
And I suppose, Ziyanda, that's difficult for people who are on the outside to understand, that on the one hand, someone might be going through a very serious court process, the likes of which Zandile Gumede and her co-accused are going through, and many other leaders in the ANC as well, and yet that somehow is separate from what's happening in the political realm.
It's funny that you mentioned that, Michelle, because, whilst those who are outside of the ANC are for the most part, are viewing this as a jarring kind of process that's been undertaken to re-elect Zandile Gumede into the party, for the delegates who are here today, I mean, if you look at the numbers, she won, by a majority and a significant victory that she attained. And interestingly, that even her own opponent in this run-up to the announcement of results, Thabani Nyawose, he even said, ironically, that this is still a victory for the ANC's renewal process. And so when it goes back to that discussion about, the ANC versus putting the country first and the needs of citizens first. Already some are saying that, this result and what we're seeing taking place in regions and provinces across the country is likely to be, the implications are likely to be seen at the polls in 2024. But let's listen to what Thabani Nyawose had to say as he congratulated Zandile Gumede last night.
I think the manner branches of the ANC conducted themselves during the nomination process and the manner the preparations of this conference has been. The conference itself, the conduct of delegates, and also till we were discussing credentials and the voting process. I'm confident this is a foundation for the ANC in the eThekwini region to renew, to rebuild, and to unite itself. I'm confident the future of our region is bright.
Ziyanda Ngcobo, as always, thanks very much for giving us that analysis on the latest in the world of politics. She's live to us there in KwaZulu-Natal.